Thank you, Elizabeth. I was in the meditation thinking, okay, she can continue. I'm happy to give this over to her. But I'm very excited to be here and, of course, have way more content than we have time for. And I was really reflecting, because we'd spoken about it earlier when we got together, about the conflict right now in Israel and Palestine and how much space that's taken up in my being in the last couple of days. And I realized as we were sitting here in practice together how so often what is happening in the human world is front and center in our consciousness and awareness because we're humans. We have this kind of a tacit agreement as a species to pay attention to one another, what's going on, because it impacts all of us. And yet, meanwhile, in the background, there is this being called the earth body, which we are implicitly part of. And the earth body very often doesn't get the same degree of attention and care and concern as the human body. And for me, that essentially is how ecosomatics is saying, let's level the playing field. Let's bring our attention to the more than human world. And as we cultivate the ground of our own being in our individual soma, how to also be aware of the reciprocity of the larger body with the smaller body. And as we, as somatic movement educators and therapists, cultivate this ground within ourselves, how can we also extend that care and attention to the earth body? I mean, any implicit thinking or pursuing or considering trauma in the individual body is going to be reflected in the ways that we have also abused the land. We have a culture that has extracted from the earth for quite a while so many things that, of course, make our lives better, but at a cost to the rest of the species that we share the planet with. And there is a movement now that I think is really important for all of us who are concerned with body ecology and planetary ecology called degrowth. And degrowth, I think, is a very exciting concept, asking us to look at our habits and patterns of consumption to basically scale down from this growth economy to an economy where we are living within our means so that we can share space with other beings on the planet. This, for me, is fundamental to how we can begin to restore our place in the world as well as to nurture the earth. So, this conversation that we were beginning to have here in the Ecosomatics Forum is one that I realized I want to involve other people in this series who are coming from different perspectives so that one, our community can come forward into the world and make our presence known because I think we have an important piece of the pie, but also to bring in these other people to be in conversation and illuminate our own awareness, not only of what's happening on a theoretical level, but what can we do as individual actors, right? Because sometimes what happens in these conversations is we might get a few limited resources of how we can be involved as activists, as people concerned and people who care. But I think that the palette of possibilities is much grander than we imagine, and that our creativity can come into play as we each create our own curriculum, our own plan of action. because that's for me what makes us, you know, we're all a little quirky in this field, of course. And that's what makes us interesting, but that we're all committed to movement. And as Feldenkrais used the expression movement behavior. So, how can our behavior in the world reflect our values? How can we each take these steps one after the other that begins to build the momentum of the dance? As we do this earth care, earth restoration, one step at a time. So I'll just say really simply that just as an example, I'm living on almost 8 acres of land right now. I'm stewarding it. I'm helping this neglected environment kind of come back to life with what's at hand. So I have these invasive vines that have been strangling a lot of the trees, and so I've been cutting them down, pulling up the roots from the ground. It's a fabulous movement experience. It's a great way to stay warm in the winter. So, in terms of my personal conservation of energy and my desire for movement expression and working with the fundamentals of movement, it gives me great satisfaction as a body engaged with these beings, knowing that I'm trying to, give them a little more space, a little more light, a little more nutrients. And it can feel like a fool's errand, like a lot of our political activism in the world. It can just feel like a fool's errand. There's so much to do. How can I just even think of doing this? But at least with my woods, and I think this for me is the great metaphor, is that I can see the discernible results of my actions. I can see this, for example, this spring, the understory is different. The vibrancy of the trees is different. The animal habitat I've built, we now have a bobcat living on the land, as well as so many other birds. And so nature is speaking to me. I am speaking to nature. And this little piece of action, connecting my movement behavior with the movement of this land, has created this incredible synthesis of action. So I could rant on and on and on and on, but I definitely want to bring in my guests because they have lots to say too. So I just simply want to say, what is ecosomatics for me? It's the inseparability of my body from the larger body of the planet. And how can I nurture and cultivate both bodies in my life? Come on in, Satu and Martha. So,
thank you, Jamie.
Any responses, reactions you want to jump in, or with what is ecosomatics for you?
Shall I go first, Martha? You're still muted. I'm recognizing, first of all, so incredible to be together with all of you. And as people were coming in, and I'm seeing some of my teachers and mentors and friends and colleagues and people that I've studied with come in, it definitely reminded me what this work for me is about. It's about being in relationship. And it's a question, obviously, that I get to ask a lot. And depending on a day even, I might answer it differently, but I'm having this incredible sense of how we arise in relationship, how the cells and the tissues of this body only arises, evolves, develops, thrives in a relationship. So that is kind of tangible to me as I see, decades of relationships in this circle. And that's something that I find myself wanting to pass on when I'm teaching. I mean, for me, somatics and ecosomatics, it's almost become the same thing. I don't even kind of want to untangle them. Like it's the work that we do. It has now this wonderful way to describe it, and it still needs a lot of discussions and sharing and further questions, like how are we bringing it forth. It is a perceptual practice, like somatic work is. It's about expanding my perception beyond this human form into everything that encompasses in time as well. So I teach anatomy from and movement from this perspective of how we came to be. And that's really what I kind of desire for my students to recognize and acknowledge. And it's also part of something that I find in this work so essential, is to recognize and acknowledge the relationship that supported us to be here. So I kind of get to say that because I have dear mentors in this circle right now. Yeah, I'm feeling warm and excited, and all kinds of emotions are passing through me. So maybe I pause just to give time for me to settle and give space for Martha.
Thank you, Satu. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone. I'm in a very quiet place right now and disturbed and upset. So I'm just humbled to be here. I as Satu was speaking, I felt the word cosmology come up, and I've been listening to Sand Talk. I don't know if you know the book Sand Talk, but I'll read the subtitle to you because it's significant to me at this time. It is How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And it's by Tyson Yunkaporta from Australia, very much speaking from Aboriginal traditions. Just last night, I was talking with friends about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the Middle East. And I was talking about how I remembered somewhere in the 80s, or maybe later 80s, early 90s, that I had heard that Aboriginal people basically were wanting to either commit suicide or just stop progeneration, just stop having children. And that was so disturbing to me. And I have to say that having Tyson Yuka Porta writing and speaking his wisdom has been both uplifting to see that there are people that have chosen to stay alive and have chosen to share their cosmologies, their understanding of where we are today, constantly embedded in a family of knowledge that is based in total interdependency with the earth and an understanding of how the earth came to be, as well as each human on the planet. So thank you for bringing that front and center, Satu. We who do body-mind centering, whether it's through dynamic embodiment or another form, really love to work with embryology and to really recognize our water source, our water environment. And for me, that was a big beginning of aside from dancing outside and just being a person who loved to move with nature. I had a father who had wanted to be a farmer, a mother who always was talking about how much she loved camp and going to Wisconsin and being on the lakes and being in the woods. But we lived in the city, and we lived in a place where my dad would tell a story that when he got there in the 50s, late 40s, but this was in the early 50s, 1950s, he was driving in the car in the neighborhood, and a kid said to him, "Norm, I know where there's a tree." So literally, they took a drive to find the one tree in like a 20-block radius. And this was Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, East Harlem. So that's where I grew up. So I guess it really made my appreciation of nature much stronger when I would find it. And so when I was doing some of my research in the 90s for violence prevention, one of the curricula that came up in schools was called eco walks. And it was at that point that what they were doing was going and taking walks and cleaning up trash. And boy, is that important. I was just reading, well, not just a long time ago, 30 years ago, I read Bill McKibben in his book, Only One, about the choice to have one child. And he said that when people move to the USA, so this is very USA, that their trash consumption doubles, that our impact on the ecology by just becoming a US citizen, if you will, or even immigrant, is horrific. And as a US person, an American here in the United States, I am very aware of just not even trusting where our recycling goes. So I bring all this up to say that when the kids were like picking up trash and at least cleaning up the riverbed around the East River in Brooklyn, it was significant to me. And so when I was invited to a conference, it was a workshop, a weekend, a festival really, called Seeds at Earth Dance, which was a place I had known of as a college student, and it's a contact improvisation kind of community, but embedded in nature from the beginning, Earth Dance. I started using this word, ecosomatics. It just felt right to me. And then soon thereafter, I found out that Sylvie 14 was using the word too. And I'm going to end with this because it goes full circle, that Sylvie's use of the word was more like what Satu just described, which is that ecosomatics was about relationships with human beings and how within our somatic world, we could have a more kind of humanistic ecological perspective. And I was coming in with a much more literal, like spend time in nature, feel our own child nature, which I'd like to come back to, work with children and what they can teach us. And just being of ecology and bringing ecological thoughts and actions and movement behavior from our somatic lens. So I'll stop there.
I appreciate how you brought up the kind of the urban rural kind of, I would call it, divide, and how that sometimes the lack creates more appreciation. That one tree all of a sudden being the symbol of life and being so amazing. And in our freedom and our ability to do this, that, and the other, to travel here and there, what I would call this small sliver of time that we've experienced in the modern world in maybe like the last 50 years, that all of a sudden that is being highlighted as how can we begin to scale back, not so much to lose our freedom, but to discover more of our inner freedom and the appreciation for what we have. I mean, one of the challenges of modernity is if I want a drink of water, I just turn on my faucet. If I'm cold, I flip on a switch. And, I've lived rurally for a while where, for example, my heat source and my cooking source was a wood burning stove. So I had to be very conscious of when I would invite in heat or how I would cook. And so just to say that this notion of appreciation for what is, and as we scale back to realize that we're not depriving ourselves of freedom, but that we're discovering new freedoms. And because I'd say that's where we're kind of a step ahead as quote unquote body people, we can derive satisfaction from this soma. We can dance. You don't need to pay to dance. We can sing our song. We can make contact with ourselves and others. And coming back to this idea of indigenous wisdom, those of you who've spent any time around indigenous cultures know that all of that is implicit in the fabric of the community. Song, dance, hands-on healing. You can find that in almost any traditional culture around the world. And I'm very aware that today in the United States is Indigenous Peoples Day, which is something that started in Berkeley years ago, yay Berkeley, and little by little has spread around the United States that it is actually named. President Biden this year acknowledged Indigenous Peoples Day, which I think is a step forward when you consider the power of words, that this is being named as an acknowledgement. And I know that one of my pivotal teachers, Lauren Smith, who was a Pomo Kashaya native healer in California, that from working with him over many years, realizing that, oh, it's true, in the simplicity of doing healing ceremonies, we sing, we dance, we make contact. All of these resources that we use in our work that are derived from this long, long tradition. So in scaling back, we actually find more the resources within us that can be utilized for greater and greater liberation, particularly from the growth economy of the capitalist system. So let's just take a 1 minute pause. I want to turn our focus, because it feels important to name this, is Martha or Satu, how the earth disruptions have impacted you personally, physically, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually. I think for everybody in this last year, earth disruptions have really been front and center, really catching our attentions with the heat waves, the floods. It's like it's everywhere. And I know we all, as sensate creatures, really experience firsthand how this is impacting us in our communities. And so
I could come back
yeah.
to water.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that I've been very blessed and have not experienced personally water destruction. I mean, yeah, maybe a flood in my house that ruined some furniture, you know, and one of my favorite anatomy books. So yes, but it wasn't natural disaster. It was human error. However, I just had a confluence of things happen in 2007, right around this Seeds 2008 festival that happened at Earth Dance, and this blossoming of the word ecosomatics, these beginning to use it, which was that I met a man named William Marks, and he actually changed his name to William Waterway. He was a young college student who had been in Pittsburgh and was just wondering why the water was so disgusting around the campus and maybe a little surrounding area. And so he went upstream and he found out what industry was doing to rivers and to that river in particular. And really did many things like horseback ride across America and study the rivers in different places. Anyway, he was in a film that year that opened. It was called FLOW, FLOW, which was an acronym for the love of water. And I think what struck me most about the film was not so much climate disaster, but corporate greed. Because what it shared was turning off the water sources for whole villages in the global south. And it was literally in India, Africa, and South America, that villages were now having to go, just only able to go every 2 weeks to fill their water containers and then make that last for 2 weeks, because the water was being redirected by Nestle and Coca-Cola and some other firms to create the bottled water that so many of us drink from all over the world. And that just hit me in all the deep, guttural, gutsy ways that hurt. And that film gets taken off the air all the time and then back on, you know, they have a struggle to keep it out there. So that actually led to an action from the ecosomatic world of dance in particular, and from the Laban lineage, coming out of movement choirs and the idea of moving outside and connecting some with nature, but also with labor and labor that is of the hands, like you talked about gardening and taking care of your earth and clearing away vines, clearing understory. So we started, this group was at Dartington Hall. We went out and danced in the rain because it was raining for 3 days. And we were at the, what's it called? There's the Schumacher College of Ecological Studies in Dartington, England now. And we stayed there in that building and ate simply and got wet and dressed and had no central heat, you know, much of what you just described. Just living simpler with dancing and singing, and what Angeles Arian would call the 4 healing salves, which salves, dancing, singing, silence, and storytelling. And we started telling stories, and I talked about William Marks and the movie Flow. And then I remembered, and Mary Lee Hardenberg was with us, that she had done this incredible set of 7 site-specific dances all at the same time along the Mississippi River. So this gesture is the Mississippi River from North Dakota to New Orleans. And actually this had happened. The rehearsals had started before Hurricane Katrina, and the performance happened afterwards. So it went through all, in New Orleans, all of that angst. And she also was so clever. She got the radio stations to play the music. So simultaneously in 7 cities along the Mississippi, there was a dancing that was happening about celebrating the river. And then this group at Dartington decided, not only do we want to celebrate water and that we come from water and our birth story embryologically of being of water, but also the plight of water, and that coming from that same Schumacher idea, which I got to know more and more about. I knew about it in college, but in getting to know Carol Swan and the development of Moving on Center, and the whole idea of starting school with moving outside, which I just have to say started often with Jamie McHugh leading us dancing for a day or two on the beach or in the redwoods. The whole notion of local, act locally and think globally. And so when we decided to start something called Global Water Dances, the notion was to celebrate water and to also describe what kind of plight your local area is in. So in New York State, we feel we made a little difference in stopping fracking, where gas was being extracted from the earth and cracking rocks to get at it, which then poisoned the aquifer, the fresh water of the earth. And other places were dealing with red tide and poison. Other places were drought and not dancing in a dry riverbed in Mexico. So all over the world, people were beginning to tell these stories. So that's what came up for me, was just how we can stick with what's really real for us, and then also connect it with a global perspective. Thank you.
And I want to dovetail on that in terms of your creative action arising out of an inner yearning and identification, to then take that and magnify that into action in the world. And that, I think, is part of our agency as creators, no matter how that creation manifests, right? We can do it artistically, we can do it socially, we can do it in relationship. And particularly in terms of water, and one of the guests I'm hoping to get on this series is Judith Schwartz, who's done a lot of work with this idea that it's restoring waterways and marshlands can actually mitigate a lot of the issues that we are having with emissions. So often people are thinking just of emissions and what we're putting into the atmosphere, but more and more of the research is finding it's the restoration of the planet and promoting biodiversity which will also begin to impact all that. So instead of just kind of looking at the sky and just thinking in terms of green energy, that it's actually getting back down to earth and really caring for and restoring the wetlands. So the fact that Global Water Dances has made an impact for many people to just begin to come together. And I think this for me is really important, that activism doesn't have to be one way. It doesn't have to be dry, onerous, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. It can actually be a wonderful opportunity for generative, creative relationships, expressions of joy, because we all know that we could use more joy, and that joy lifts us up, right? Really lifts us up and expresses the heart of our being. So I thank you and bow down to you for Global Water Dances, which started from this small seed and kind of just began to expand. Satu, I'm dying to hear from you.
Thank you. There are plenty of thoughts as you're both sharing. So we do need the play and the joy and the dancing, and we also need rest and hibernation. So when you asked the kind of the personal experience of how have natural disasters impacted us, I come from Finland. I come from the Northern Europe. I grew up in a forest. I mean, those are my first relations, rocks and trees and water. And when I started doing somatics very early on, I questioned why the work needs to happen in temperature controlled spaces, square rooms, clean floors. I mean, there's a beauty to that, as we know, but it didn't feel that I got to explore who I am fully when I get to be in the spaces that I grew up in. So I really, like, my family and my kind of generations before me, they've lived from the forest, kind of foraging and feeling how the environment nourishes us, and that it's a reciprocal, how do you even say that word? Reciprocal relationship with our environment. And I keep noticing how things get drier. There are different kinds of insects. It's like the loss of winters, just to go back to that hibernation aspect, because when we lose a season, we also lose a rhythm that calls us inwards, so that then we can be out when there is sunlight, and then we can be in when there's less of that. And the kind of natural exertion recuperation cycle that Martha also talked about, the kind of Laban roots of the ecosomatic work. I feel that in my tissues, and I kind of want to say what has been said already, that how the earth is, so is the body. There's really all of the dryness and the heat. I feel its effects in my tissues. Maybe also because of my genetics, because I do thrive in cold climates, and I feel more at home in cold. So kind of a loss of habitat personally. Yes, yeah, so much more to say, but I remember I studied at Moving On Center. I lived in California, and I went away for some years, and I remember coming back and I thought something has shifted. It was drier. The fog was different. It just, the air was hotter than I remembered feeling it before. So it's really like how, because we so sensitively feel the environments inside, it also sensitizes us to recognize this particular shifts in the seasons and in the environment. Yeah, I could go on and on. I'm curious where else we might want to go with the conversation. So maybe I pause, but I think it's a question that hasn't so drastically impacted me because of where I live currently, and I know that's not the case to those who live south of Europe, for example. At the moment, it's been horrendous this summer specifically. So, yes.
I know we had talked earlier in one of our initial conversations about, and I think this is true for all of us, of coming to terms with all this, being sensitive to it, and that necessary rite of passage of sinking a little bit into despair and hopelessness. And that we both kind of shared that common element of the, what I'd call the zeal and the idealism of, we're here to be agents of change, and we're going to change things, and just, and how the sobering effect of that despair and hopelessness kind of took the wind out of our sails, and that then something else could happen. And it was really in our conversation together that I realized it is a rite of passage that all of us go through. And at the same time, like any other natural process, on the other side of that is something different. Perhaps a less grandiose vision of change. We're not going to save the world, but maybe we can, in a sense, really do the best we can with what we have where we are. And and I just, because I'm aware that we're almost out of time. We just gotta end it, Like I said, I had grand ideas for us getting together and small group breakout. But I wish you would say something about the work you're doing uh, at the university with college students, because I found that really meaningful in terms of your application of not only your sensitivity and your training and your own kind of coming to terms with what I would call the boundaries or limits of reach, that what you've discovered in working with these young people.
Thank you. I also have to apologize. It's getting dark here, so um my view is getting a little. I recognize that you might not see me as well. I've been teaching ecosomatics in a theater school in Helsinki since with that term since 2011, so about 12 years. And I told Jamie that this fall they finally added it into the curriculum of I teach it for the Swedish speaking, Swedish is the second language in Finland, to the Swedish speaking actors. So I teach 3 years in the BA somatics and then 2 years in the master's program ecosomatics. And these young people, I mean, they're getting younger, aren't they, every year? I feel they're deeply searching for ways because they recognize what world is out there for them. How are they going to work? What is their art? So I feel like I get to have a place with them to ask questions. And maybe like this work in general, I feel like it is about supporting the agency of us feeling like we have some choice and responsibility as well. So I was telling Jamie how long things sometimes take. Like it took 12 years for me teaching this work, and then somebody at this point, maybe it's the time they needed it. The students are really hungry for this work, for these ways of articulating that it's not, that there's no separation, that they as actors, as people who go into the theaters, and that part of their work will be taking these questions forward. So that's exciting. I'm excited. It's in a university curriculum.
Bravo.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. It's very touching. I'm aware of time. It is 12:59. And I just, first of all, want to acknowledge Satu and Martha for being in this conversation with me and helping me take my first steps into this series. I knew I would love being with them because I know that they're friendly and supportive and just such sweet beings. And so, as that old body mind centering, support precedes articulation. And so, little by little, stepping out into the world with this. But I also want to acknowledge all of you who took the time today to show up, because one of my initial questions with this series is, do people care? Do people care? what do people want to do with that caring? And what is the action that can arise out of our caring that's not, you know, masochistic, forcing ourselves to do things, but really embracing the possibility of change and how we can each contribute to that and create like a mycelial network of so many different actions and positive expressions of our creativity that we do generate little by little those ripples and those waves and that oceanic sense of connection between all of our actions. So I will continue to add more resources to the Ecosomatics Forum. Please drop by, add your own resources, because I think there's a great abundance of creativity and spirit in this community, and I want to see it expressed. And I'm so sorry that we got carried away. I'm not a very good moderator when I'm in a good. It's like, oh, I didn't adhere to the schedule if I wanted to have breakout rooms and people talk, but maybe we will have a follow up chat session at some point. So, yes. So, Martha or Satu or Elizabeth, anything you'd like to say to close out our time together?
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Satu. And thank you, Martha, for launching this vitally important conversation in our somatic movement community. Clearly, almost 10% of the membership said that they wanted to be here in the RSVP process. So you are tapping into a really important stream of inquiry here. And my hope is that the ISMETA membership continues participating and supporting these conversations that you're offering through your series of podcasts, Earth Matters, Ecosomatics in the Anthropocene, and perhaps through ISMETA events that we would be happy to continue hosting in the future. So great gratitude and best wishes for everyone on the call and viewing the video for implementing new awarenesses, new perspectives, new inspirations that you may have gleaned from these conversations into your personal and professional work.
And please feel free to reach out, drop me an email of anything that's percolating for you. I'm very happy to be a curator and resource builder of just all the different perspectives that we share in this community. So thank you.
Thank you,
Mark.
Jay.